The problem with AI agents is they have a terrible memory, a memory as bad as a goldfish. After a certain point, they'll just forget. So you need to come up with ways to handle this memory in the applications that you're building or in the harnesses that you're using. For this video, I'm going to focus on if you are actually building an agentic system, not using a harness such as Claude Code, you're actually building your own thing. So the way that memory works in an AI agent is that at the very basic level, you have got the conversation history that you're having with the agent. So say you come in and you say, hello, ChatGPT, and ChatGPT goes, oh, hello, Simon, how are you doing? And every time you then talk to the agent after that, those two messages are fed back in and it builds up and up and up and up till you get this history of your conversation growing, which is fed in every time. And that's called your context. There's a bit more to it as well, where before the message history, I've talked about this in the previous video, you've got like the system instructions, what the agent is, what it does, and sort of general information about how the conversation needs to go. The trouble you've got is that agents, the input that you can feed into the LLM has got a finite cutoff limit. So for like some of them it's like 200,000 tokens, others it's 1 million, but eventually you're going to get to the point where the conversation history is going to get too big to feed it in, and then so you need to do something drastic. Like normally you'll like compact the conversation, which essentially just makes a summary of the conversation, and then you start the conversation again, and then it goes down, you do all the messages, get to the point where you need to do a compaction, makes a summary, and off you go. But you do this a few times and then you expect the agent to remember something you did last week. Suddenly it can't, it's compacted away. The summary's just got rid of it. No way of knowing about it. So even this happens day to day, it's not even a week, day to day this does happen. So you need to come up with ways to be able to let the agent remember. And there's a few techniques from the most basic up to like fairly complicated. So the most basic one you can do is you basically just record a file of important things. You basically create a skill, or just tell in your instructions and your system instructions the agent to, if anything important happens or any important decisions happen, or you tell it a way to do something or something important, it writes it to this file, or which probably would be stored in a database if you're building an online system. And every time you have an interaction with the LLM, it's appended to the end of the messages. You wouldn't do it at the start of the messages, near the system messages, because it changes. And I've talked about this previously, that busts the cache. So you want to put it towards the last message. And then that just updates. And then eventually you'd have to trim that a bit, So other ways of doing it is, instead of passing it in every turn, you can do another way where essentially it retrieves the information it needs when it needs it. This is called RAG, retrieval augmented generation. But basically you can pull in, it's like a database where it's semantic search, where the LLM can search by meaning. You say, I want to find about, what was that article we talked about last week that was about, ChatGPT's context limits. And you can do a query against it's called a vector database, which will pull in all of the information, because it's timestamped about last week, about potential matches, and you can pull that in and it remembers. So that's another way of doing it. You can use files on your file system. If your agent can have access to a file system, you could create a file structure where you could have like ideas, you could have decisions, you could have stuff about contacts in different folders. And these would just be like files on a disk, like markdown files. And then every time to the agent, you'd pass in an index of essentially all of the files and what they are and what they're about. So if the agent needs to look something up, it can say, okay, look, we want to look up about Bob. Says, oh, Bob lives in contacts in this folder, and it can load that file in that turn using a tool which can read the file system. This doesn't really work when you're doing it on a server, though. It can work, but it's probably not the most optimal way of doing it. So all of these have pros and cons. There's probably other ways of doing it, but these are like the sort of the main ones that I use. So memory file could eventually just get way too big, fill up half of your context. Retrieval augmented generation, you need to maintain a database. Once that starts getting too big, it can be hard to query, and it's a little bit clunky because every time you need to look something up, it has to do a lookup to a database, which is a tool call, which is more context into the history, which uses your tokens. There is a kind of in-between way of doing it, which Mastra were the first people I saw who did this, and I've implemented it in my agent system, is it's called observational memory, where you look at the conversation history. Once it gets to a certain point, a certain size of tokens, you essentially summarize it into observations, which is like a trimmed down version of it, and then you pass that through every time, and then you start like the messages from that point. Then eventually, once the observations get too big, you then distill those down even further into reflections, which are like a summarized version of it, and pass that in. And that kind of keeps all of your messages at a finite number of tokens, because you can cap the observations, cap the reflections, and cap the messages. So you can sort of just keep an endless memory. And then if you back that with a vector database as well, where you've got pointers into stuff that happened, it's essentially a limitless memory, and it works really well. And for the things that I passed in on the one that I did an extra layer of distillation, which is an era summary, which is like stuff that's like, it's like reflections, observations, and then an era summary, but then with the RAG database as well. And it seems to work really well. And my agents can remember stuff that happened since they were born. You know, they've got personas, my agents, by the way, so I start like to think of them as born, so they can remember all the way back to their birth, and it works really well. So you can go out, try some of these techniques, and go out and make some cool shit.